Thank you, John. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. So when John asked me to present, I thought about giving PhD students advice. These are 6 pieces of advice that are things that I've either discovered over time that I can share with you and maybe save you the time of discovering, or things that I wish I had been told when I was sitting in your seat at this stage. I tried to make them actionable. If one of the slides was "get a good job," that of course, right? That's kind of vague. That doesn't help you, right, at all. I tried to give you very specific pieces of advice, as if as I would want to be given if I was sitting in your seat. They're in no particular order, but they're grouped into common themes. So the first 3 will be how to come up with a research idea, and the second 3 will be advice on getting a job. And just as a disclaimer, these pieces of advice were helpful to me, but your mileage may vary with them. All right, so first, 3 related to how to come up with research ideas. This is a tough question, right? This is a really tough question. Research ideas are ultimately a creative pursuit. It's like asking Imagine Dragons, give me the formula. How do you come up with your next big hit? It's going to be very hard to answer that, right? You can't write down a formula for that. So with that in mind, that this is sort of difficult, let me give you 3 sort of nudges in the right direction. Again, it's not going to be formulaic. Research is not formulaic. Creativity is not formulaic. Number 1 is join or create a reading group. I find that the first step in coming up with good research ideas is to look at other good research ideas, right? You need to see it, going back to the Imagine Dragons analogy. Imagine Dragons probably listens to a lot of great rock and roll songs over the last 30, 40 years, right? They have seen what good work looks like, and that helps them inform whether they're writing the next big hit or not. Same thing with you. And what a reading group does is it's a great way to do that. You get positive externalities often with the people you're in a reading group with, and it's a disciplining mechanism. So by the way, for those who don't know, a reading group is a meeting of, could be 4, 5, 6 people, something like that. Usually at your level, if you're an assistant professor, it's a group of assistant professors. If you're a PhD student, it's a group of PhD students. You meet every couple weeks or so, and you discuss a paper that you all have read ahead of time, right? You sort of share your ideas about it. It's a great disciplining mechanism that pushes you to consistently be reading research. Picking people here is really important, I've found over time. You don't want to just send out a general email, anyone join the reading group. That's not what you want to do. You want to pick people that you have positive externalities with. Perhaps the most important is the second bullet point. You want a group where you have the freedom to say dumb things around them. Okay? Because you want the risk in saying anything related to research, because when you take that risk, often you can land on a really good idea. Does that make sense? If you're really timid in what you say in a reading group, you're less likely to say something which is that next big idea. Okay? You want to be in a group of people where you can say something like, I can see why the standard errors go up, but I don't understand why the t-stats go down. Right? If you can say that in that group, that's an econometric joke. It's okay if you didn't laugh. If you can say that in the reading group, that's a group of comfortable people, right? If you can kind of sound dumb in front of them, that's the group you want. Okay. So, piece of advice number 1 is to join or create a reading group. 2, this is something as close to a formulaic approach to a research idea that I could think of. But read papers outside your area that have portable ideas. Read papers outside your area that have portable ideas. Of course, you need to read seminal papers in finance. You need to know what Jensen and Meckling is. You need to know what Kyle is. You need to know what Fama French is. And of course, Engelberg and Parsons. No, that part was a joke. But you need to know what the seminal papers in finance are. But for new ideas, that's what we're talking about, right? For new ideas, I find it very useful to look outside my own area and look for something which is portable. What I mean by portable is you read a paper and you ask yourself, what is the underlying technology or idea that makes this paper work? can I take that technology out of this paper and plop it into finance, or into my specific area inside finance? I'll give you an example. In a reading group with Christopher Parsons here at the front, we read a paper by Beggs and Grady in the AER in 2009. It's about art auctions. Chris and I really have no interest in art auctions, okay? But it was in the AER, and it was a very clever idea. Here is the idea. The paper looked at periods of time in which art markets were hot and cold. Okay? There's sometimes when art was selling for a lot, sometimes art was selling for very little. Okay? And they looked at art auctions where the same piece of art was auctioned off twice in a time series. So a Picasso was sold in 1985, and then a Picasso was sold again in 1992. Does that make sense? Okay. What the authors find is that the Picasso selling in 1992, it mattered whether when it last sold in 1985, the art market was in a hot or cold state, right? That's nothing specific to the Picasso, right? If 1985 happened to be a cold state, what the authors find is that the 1992 piece of art sells for less, right? It's anchored towards this lower value, and it just happened to be lower because it happened to sell in a cold market rather than a hot market. So we read that, and then we asked ourselves, what is the underlying technology that makes this paper work? What makes it work? Well, you need time series variation in some state variable. Here, it's the hotness and coldness of art markets, right? It's moving around over time. Sometimes art is hot, sometimes it's not. 2, you need a repeat transaction, right? You need the same piece of art selling once and then again. Okay? Take that technology, where does it belong, and where can I put that idea inside finance? And we thought of syndicated loans. So syndicated loans are when Dell borrows from Wells Fargo. Well, it turns out they do that more than once, right? So Dell will borrow multiple times. Also, in the fixed income markets have hot periods and cold periods, right? As interest rates rise and fall. Does that make sense? And so we wrote a JF paper, which is exactly the Beggs and Grady AER paper, just applied to loans. A repeat transaction. Does today's loan, the interest rate you get on today's loan, is it a function of whether the last time you borrowed happened to be in a hot market or a cold market? Does that make sense? So it's just a portable idea we found in a reading group just by reading outside of our area. Okay. I can tell I'm talking for a little, so I'll skip example number 2. Where can you look outside your area? So where are good places to find these portable ideas? Well, again, you want to go to elite places. You want to look for the best ideas. I would start with the top econ journals. So you may or may not know there are 5 journals in econ that are considered A's, definite A's, the top journals: AER, QJ, Econometrica, JPE, and Restud. Look at recent articles in those 5. That's a great place to start. Another great place are NBR conference programs. So again, you may or may not know, there's always a website that has all the NBR meetings. So this is for 2018, and you can look at the labor meeting, the behavioral econ meeting, the asset pricing meeting, the health econ meeting if you're reading outside your area, so on and so forth. These are generally elite papers written by elite people. They're really good ideas here. Right? So you can go through paper programs on the NBR and look for ideas outside your area which are portable. Okay?
Joey, can I just clarify, is that public?
I'm sorry?
Is that website public?
It is public. Yeah, that's a public address. conference.nbr.org/confer 2018/2018.html. If you change the 2018s to 2017s, you'll get this exactly for 2017.
Does it show up in search engine? Do people need to be copying down that address?
I don't know if it shows up in a search engine.
I'm not sure it shows up in a search engine.
Okay.
I think
it is a public website, but maybe it does not show up in it. So if anyone wants my slides where you can find this, and again, if you want to look at the 2017 program, you just change 2 things in this web address, right? 2018 changes to 2017 both times. Okay? All right. All right. Number 3, and this is for empiricists, for the empirical people in the room. Make it a habit to look for new data. So thousands of academics now have been looking at CRISP and CompuStat, right, for decades. The chance that you are going to find a genuine, not data mined, new insight in CRISP or CompuStat alone is low, right? Because there have been thousands of people who looked at those data before you. Okay? The chance of a new insight is much better with newer data. Hopefully that's intuitive to all of you. So my advice is to make a habit to look for it. So how do you do it? How do you make a habit to look for new data? Go back to tip number 2, reading papers outside your areas. I'll often find out about a new data set when I'm reading papers outside my own area, right? Do regular web searches or read database blogs. So I committed myself to doing this the first few years when I was at University of North Carolina. I did it again when I moved to UCSD. I would take an hour every week and just go database hunting. Just go data hunting, interesting data hunting. Chris and I had a project where we were interested in the relationship between stock market returns and some measure of health outcomes. So here's the idea: the stock market drops a lot. Do people buy more headache medication, or are they more depressed, or so on and so forth? Every week I would look for something that looked like a health-related dependent variable. Really hard to find. We got on calls with health insurance companies. Couldn't find anyone who would give us any health-related data. Well, in one of my weekly searches for data, I found out that California actually collects hospital admissions data from every hospital in the US and would make it available to me because I work for the University of California. And it was just by searching, just by being disciplined about searching for health-related data, stumbled upon the data, and now I can connect the two, and that became a JF paper that Chris and I wrote. Okay. There are actually database blogs, people that are interested, because we are in the midst of sort of a data revolution in terms of the number of new data sources that are available. There are blogs that talk about new data sources which are available. I linked one for you here, but this blog just talks about new data that's being posted. That might be interesting. Take some time to actively look for new data sources. Sometimes you have to collect it yourself. So sometimes it's not all put together in a database for you. Learn a tool to do it. Now, some of you may not be super hardcore programmers, and that might seem sort of daunting, but I will tell you there are tools that require very little programming ability. I'll give you an example of one. One is called iMacros. It's an add-in to Firefox. It's literally an add-in, and you can program it, and again, I'm using that word program very loosely. It's very few lines to systematically go through thousands and thousands of pages. It's very, very simple, and download the content. You can read all that content in your favorite language, R or SAS or something like that. Okay? But take the time to learn these tools. Again, this is not difficult. The tools today are quite straightforward. All right, John, how am I doing on time?
You got 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. I'm going to go through these last 3 somewhat quickly. All right, this is the second piece of advice on getting a job. So obviously this is my more general piece of advice. This isn't so specific and actionable, but it's obviously very important to write a good job market paper. I know some of you are on the market and have already written. Some of you are not on the market and are still writing a paper. Write a good job market paper. What makes a good job market paper beyond what we've discussed earlier? Well, let's talk about what makes a bad kind of job market paper. A not so good job market paper is something that just shows what another paper shows in a larger sample, in a different country, in a different setting, something like that. That's not much of an incremental contribution. Showing something with small economic significance, again, characteristic of not such a great job market paper. What a good one looks like, often it's solo authored, it's transparent. So as a consumer of job market papers, I like papers, and I think others do, where I can access the main result. And one way to have the main result accessible is to show it in simple univariates. Right? So if you're showing a relationship between an x variable and a y variable, right? If you just show it to me by first taking x, cutting it into terciles, then regressing it on something, then taking the residual, then putting it into deciles, and then showing me the relationship with y, it's hard for me to access it. Does that make sense? It's much simpler if you show me the result in simple univariates first. It holds without all of those gymnastics. Right? It holds in its basic form, and then in a regression where I control for many things, it also holds. Okay? Make it accessible. A good job market paper is accessible in that way. A good job market paper shows off the skills of the author. If your skills are sniffing out cool new data sets, if your skills are in econometrics, or your skills are in machine learning, whatever it is, it shows off those skills. As an example, Cooper et al. Is a very famous paper in the JF. It documents the asset growth anomaly. It sorts stocks by their percent change in assets and shows that predicts returns. It's very simple and straightforward. It's a great JF paper. It's important. It's probably not a great job market paper because it doesn't show off any skills. It's very simple. Does that make sense? You want a job market paper that shows off your skills. Number 5, be selective in choosing letter writers. So think of the job market process in 2 stages. Stage number 1 is getting job interviews. Okay? Stage number 2 is everything that comes after the interview. The fly out, maybe the post-fly out phone call, negotiation, et cetera, et cetera. Letter writers are really important for number 1. Letter writers help you get in the door. They help you get in the door. Once you get in the door for the interview, it's all up to you at that point. Letter writers are really important for number 1. So again, some people this ship has already sailed, but for those who this ship has not sailed yet, let me give you some advice about what a great letter writer looks like. The optimal letter writer is someone that's still research active or relevant. When I see letters about people, right, I will value the opinion of someone who's currently engaged in a lot of scholarship more than someone who has been out of the game for a while. Make sense? Someone who's well connected and willing to use it. So there are letter writers who write a letter and then follow up with an email, maybe even follow up with a phone call. Obviously, those are the best kind of letter writers for you. Someone who's, and of course they have to be well connected. They need to know who to call, right? Someone who's really well connected in the profession and is willing to spend capital to push you, to get you that interview. Knows you well. So you can have a lot of great characteristics, but if you ask someone to write a letter that you haven't engaged with much, they don't have the fodder or the meat to write much about you. So someone that knows you well, so that they have plenty to write about. And then finally, this one might seem a little bit trite, but there are letter fixed effects. There are some people that write persistently kind of pessimistic letters, and some people that write persistently optimistic letters. It's not a fully revealing equilibrium. I don't know every person's sort of bias, and so I can't perfectly update whenever I see a letter. So there'll be times when I get a pessimistic person writing a letter about a candidate, and I don't know to kind of add 10 points on average, right? Because that person is kind of more negative on average. This is hard to know who's pessimistic and optimistic, but to the extent that you can find out who is kind of a generous, nice letter writer, you want to pick those. Again, some people are persistently of one type versus another. Last piece of advice, take action to stand out. It's useful for you to think of yourself competing against hundreds of others for just a couple of slots. So, I'm sure it's true at other schools. Often, when we have 1 or 2 spots to hire in, we'll get 200 plus applications for those 1 to 2 spots. Okay. So think of yourself relative to the 199 other people competing for the same spot. The primary way to stand out is what we talked about earlier, a creative job market paper and strong letters. That was point 4 and 5. But you can think about other ways. So here are 2 examples that come to mind. Number 1, what you're doing right now. Going to conferences, right? The other 180 students aren't here. You are here, right? Going to conferences to promote your work. Submit your job market paper to conferences and attend them. I'm part of a committee that organizes a conference in Vegas called the FRA. We make it a point to try very hard to put one of the 8 or 9 papers that we select. That's a PhD paper, a PhD student paper. You wouldn't believe how few PhD student submissions we get. It's puzzling, right? We make an effort to promote PhD work, but we don't get many PhD submissions. That's a missed opportunity, right? That's an opportunity for you to stand out in comparison to the 199 others. Okay. Here was something I did to try and stand out relative to the 199 others. On the receiving end of applications, here's how I will look at your file. I will see, it'll access a database. In that database will be your CV, it will be your job market paper, and usually 3 letters, okay? And I will access it electronically. And I'll go through them and I'll say, oh, John, good or bad. I'll make some notes and I'll go through them. Okay? One way to stand out, and this is something I did on my job market, is suppose you submit your packet to 20 schools, and there are 6 schools that have faculty members that do research really close to you. Suppose you're doing research in executive compensation, and you identify 6 faculty members that are really close to your research. Okay? As an idea, print out your job market paper, which is about executive compensation, put it in a large, 8.5 by 11 envelope, write a note, a handwritten note to each of those 6 people, and mail it to them. Your paper will be the only one that they actually open and have it printed out and read. The other 199 they will be accessing on a computer. Yours will be the only one they have a handwritten note to them. The other 199 will not. That automatically makes you stand out from this crowd of 199. Then, when all the faculty get in a room and discuss who should we have out, your name in one person's faculty member mind is going to stick out. Does that make sense? Okay. So again, that's just a small tidbit. For what it's worth, I did that with 8 schools, and I got interviews at all 8. Again, that's an anecdote, but it seemed to work well for me on the job market. But it comes from a mindset of trying to think about this is a very competitive process and how you can stand out relative to the other 199 candidates. All right, those are my 6 pieces of advice. Thank you so much for your time. I hope some of that is useful.